You're likely to, though.
Yeah.
It always makes you jump. Well, welcome. It's good to see a crowd, actually. I was wondering if anyone even paid attention to it sometimes, except what they read in those papers that tell everything like it's not supposed to be. So, anyway, we appreciate everyone being here. Our workshop that we have here. Thank you. The workshop that we have is a report concerning the Cache County elections. And at this point, we'd like to have that presentation by the Office of the Utah Lieutenant Governor's Office. And if you would, in presenting that, you'll come up here in whatever speaker order or that. And if you could, please state your name and who you represent, and then share us your findings, and whatever sequence that you have, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the council. My name is Ryan Cowley, and I'm the Director of Elections for the state of Utah. I work under Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson. It's good to be here. I grew up in Cache Valley. I'm a Cache Valley native, and this building is absolutely beautiful. The last time I was in here before last week, it was the old drab, worn down courthouse, and so to see it restored to this level, it's a beautiful job. So whoever was involved in that did a phenomenal job restoring that. The reason we're here today is over the last couple of elections, the primary and especially the general election, we noticed a number of serious concerns that arose in the Cache County elections during 2023. Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson and her staff conducted a full review of the elections and the processes on December 5th of 2023. That review exposed numerous and multiple violations of Utah election law, administrative rule, the Utah Election Handbook, and basic principles of election administration. Although no evidence of fraud was discovered, the review uncovered significant problems, including poor chain of custody practices that could have introduced numerous opportunities for bad actors to impact the county's election results. The major findings include the following items that are found in this report. Basically, as we went through the election cycle, the lieutenant governor's role in elections is one that's a supervisory role. We don't count ballots. We're statutorily prohibited from performing any of the functions that are statutorily delegated to the county clerks. So the clerk is an independent elected official that's charged with carrying out those elections. Ours is a supervisory role. In that supervisory role, there were a few issues that came to our attention that merited us to come back and take a deeper look. In the areas, just really quickly, kind of the three major things that we found in the areas of, there were incorrect ballots that were mailed to the cities of Paradise, to Amalga, and some sub-precincts in Logan related to the Cache School District, the bond question. There are some parts of Cache School District that do come into Logan City. Also, we did notice that once those errors were corrected, new ballots were mailed out, the incorrect database continued to be used by the county for tabulation, and that wasn't discovered until the night before the election. And that led to, we do what's called a logic and accuracy test for every database prior to conducting elections and processing ballots, and had a proper logic and accuracy test been conducted, or simply opening up the database, looking at the new ballot styles that were there, that would have led them to know that they had the incorrect database. Then the other thing that we found was a very serious lack of chain of custody controls. So throughout the ballot process, there does need to be chain of custody that controls those ballots through the entire process and notes when ballots are taken out, added to or removed to batches, those kinds of things. And those were pretty much non-existent in our review. So after the election, before those results were canvassed and certified, we felt it necessary for us to come up. So our entire election staff, which consisted of 9 individuals, came up, as well as the lieutenant governor herself, to kind of conduct a full review, which included auditing ballots, doing signature audits, kind of taking a look at the whole thing so that we could have assurances that the elections were in fact correct. And so we found no evidence of fraud, but we did find wide vulnerabilities and areas where things could have occurred that could have manipulated the election. So we want to be clear, we did not find fraud, but the opportunity was certainly there because of the lack of controls in place. So just for the sake of brevity, we'll let you read the whole report. I know we met with a few members of the council last week with Clerk David Benson to kind of go through the report, our findings, recommendations. And our goal here is to point out those areas where we notice violations of the law, policies, and provide corrective actions. So provide recommendations as to how to fix those things. And we've provided Mr. Benson the opportunity to have 2 weeks to kind of get back, identify those things, and create an action plan for Cache County so that those problems can be fixed so that we don't have this going forward. So a few of those problems that we found. One, I'll just address kind of the elephant in the room. A lot of people have been curious. There were 3 employees that were, well, 2 employees were placed on administrative leave, and then Mr. Benson placed himself on administrative leave. That came about in our review. There's that logic and accuracy test that we talked about. In the original version of that database, that occurred on October 27th. The reports were dated October 26th, but when we came and did our review, those reports were not made available to us. We asked for those, they didn't have those. In a follow-up email, we asked for those, and when we were given it, the timestamp in the reports from 2 different machines were exactly identical. So the same date, the same hour, the same minute, the same second. Now, the chances of something like that happening is very, 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 very rare. And so that led us to kind of look a little bit deeper in the reports. And then what we noticed, the ballot errors for Paradise and for Amalga, those weren't discovered until November 1st, yet that logic and accuracy test reports that we were given by the county had those corrected races. So it was something that just simply could not have possibly existed at the date and time that was created on that report. That investigation is still ongoing, so I don't want to comment further, but I felt like it was important to talk about what we found. If somebody from the county wants to speak to that further, they can, but that'll be the extent of my comments on that. So that logic and accuracy test really is kind of one of the first tests that needs to be conducted by an election official prior to counting ballots. And that ensures that every single ballot, every single position, all of the equipment is functioning properly so that we can have assurances that the results are correct. Now, with that report that was falsified to us, you'll notice when that kind of broke in the media that there were some employees placed on administrative leave, we had assurances that that didn't affect the outcome of the election. The reason we know that is because that was an incorrect version of the database that was being used. So the fact that that existed in that version of the database could not have impacted the results. But when that second, when the corrected ballots were done, members of our staff had asked the county to conduct an LNA. We were assured that it had been done. Obviously, that hadn't been done, and that's a major finding, because without that, we don't have assurances that the equipment functioned properly. Now, the night before the election, a logic and accuracy test was performed prior to counting ballots so that we could then count the ballots. Well, the clerk, we don't count ballots, but the clerk could count those ballots and know that the database and programming and everything was functioning as intended. We talked a little bit about the ballot containing those major errors. Paradise had write-in candidates who filed. 2 write-in candidates, so the original ballots that went out just had the school bond on it. They did not have the write-ins. And that was kind of a communication breakdown. There is definitely responsibility on the city recorder to proof the ballots, communicate back to the clerk. I know there were some technology issues and things like that, but there was never a final sign-off from Paradise. So that's something that between the clerk and city recorder, using checklists, making sure you have that approval prior to sending out ballots is absolutely critical. In Amalga, there were 2 races. There was a 4-year seat and a 2-year seat, and those had kind of been combined into one race, and so that is something that proofing should have caught. Now, in fairness to the county clerk, the city recorder or town clerk in Amalga did approve those ballots as well. But proofing against the filing forms and those kind of things should have detected that error prior to ballots being mailed out. The good news is those errors were corrected, but they still occurred, and those are kind of unprecedented kind of errors that we saw there. The next thing that I want to address is the county clerk's office repeatedly violated statutorily required chain of custody practices. That means the ballots were not properly retrieved, handled, batched, documented, organized, or stored. Board chain of custody practices were the single most troubling aspect of the review that we performed. Basically, when ballots come in, those are supposed to be put into batches. Well, even as far back as the ballot boxes, when they're retrieved from ballot boxes, there should be logs. There should always be 2 people with those. Those ballots should be sealed up. And then when they're brought into the clerk's office, those should be put into batches. Typically, we see anywhere from 50 in the smaller counties. The counties like Cache that use equipment, it can be 200 or 250. But they should be kept in those batches and accounted for throughout the whole process, and they just simply weren't. Additional ballots were added to, taken away from. When they went to open ballots, they were just kind of put onto a table. They would weigh the ballots, get close to 200, and then scan it. But there's no reconciling back to a known number, which just creates the opportunity for interference or things like that, or potentially mis-scanning, not scanning a group of ballots, or potentially even scanning a group of ballots twice. And so having those chain of custody types of things are really critical to election integrity. The county clerk did not use the tools in VISTA. So VISTA is the voter registration database. And that system has tools built in to manage a lot of the portions of ballot processing. With ballots that are challenged, so if somebody forgot to sign their envelope, or maybe their signature was a little shaky that day, some people have multiple signatures if it didn't match, they used a Google spreadsheet to keep track of that rather than using the built-in tools of VISTA. And that allows, so every absentee ballot that's sent out has a unique barcode on that ballot. And when you just go in and if you use the systems in VISTA, it will pop up and it'll tell you if that's a spoiled ballot, if it's the correct ballot, those kind of things. They were going in and giving manual history and then using this Google sheet to kind of track that. The danger you have with manual history is when I look a voter up, they could have multiple ballots that were issued. And when you're just giving that credit, you don't know for certain whether this is the spoiled ballot that's in front of me or if this is actually the ballot that should have been counted. And so there are features there. It will also generate the mailings to send out to voters. One of the other issues with the spreadsheet that we found is that was shared basically with anybody who was helping with elections and not just on like county-owned devices and things like that. So there was the opportunity that people could have messed around with that spreadsheet. Now, did we find evidence that that happened? No. But we want to make sure that those things are controlled on systems controlled by the county with access within the scope of the job duties of the person who's performing it. So where do we go from here? Kind of our key recommendations. So the report does contain 31 different recommendations, but the main recommendations that we have are that the county clerk should review the elections handbook. So Lieutenant Governor's office has created a handbook that gives guidance for the different processes in elections, chain of custody, ballot processing, batching, all of the logic and accuracy, ballot proofing. There's a lot of training and resources that are available and were available to the clerk's office here. So our recommendation is that they utilize those resources, that they read the law, understand the law, administrative rules, and also take direction from the Lieutenant Governor's office to ensure that Cache County is fully compliant with the law in relation to elections. The county clerk's office must review all chain of custody practices and begin following the chain of custody requirements outlined in Utah Code and administrative rule when retrieving ballots, processing ballots, and storing ballots. A big thing is documenting all of that. And these things exist. Well, it's kind of a twofold reason why these things, chain of custody, working in pairs. One of them, obviously, is to protect the integrity of the election. We don't want outside things or people to be able to manipulate it, but it is also a protection to the people who we employ in elections, to the county clerk, their staffs, to the seasonal help, volunteers. It's a protection to them so that if people make allegations, now there's a documented chain of custody that can prove that nothing happened and that those people acted within the scope of their job and their authority. The county clerk's office must complete logic and accuracy tests in accordance with the statute. That's a big one. I know they've recently completed logic and accuracy tests for this coming election, but continually doing those and doing full logic and accuracy tests where you're testing every ballot style, every type of machine, ballots that are printed by the printers, ballots that are printed when somebody comes into a polling place. They use what's called ballot on demand, also testing those ballots. So it's really testing all aspects of your election. Then lastly, kind of the big one, is the county should batch all of the ballots and track those ballots with their batches all the way through the end. So when they go to scan the ballots, if they started with 190 ballots and they scan 190 ballots, there's no additional ballots that are added to that. If there's some that are taken out for signatures, those have been noted and accounted for. And then when you scan, you know that every single ballot that was in that batch has in fact been scanned, and you know that no additional ballots have been added to that. Lastly, I would just like to read a letter from Lieutenant Governor Henderson that is directed to the Cache County Clerk, David Benson. And it says, on December 5th, 2023, my election staff conducted a thorough in-person review of your municipal general election held on November 21st, 2023. Their observation and findings are deeply troubling. My team not only found an unprecedented lack of controls, widespread violations of Utah election law and administrative rule, but also a pointed disregard for policy and practices established by my office. As the Cache County Clerk, it is your statutory duty under Utah Code Section 20A-1-1062 to diligently learn and comply with state and federal laws, rules, policies, and directions of the Lieutenant Governor. Under your watch, the 2023 Cache County Municipal Primary and General Elections fell unacceptably short of those statutory obligations. Failure to adhere to statute creates opportunities for fraud and election manipulation to occur. Fidelity to your oath of office demands that you correct these problems immediately. In my capacity as the state's chief election officer, under Utah Code Section 20A-1-105, I hereby order you to review this report and provide a written response to my office for each of the recommendations no later than February 20th, 2024. Your response must include an action plan for each recommendation and a time frame in which it will be implemented. My staff remains fully committed to your success and to the success of your team, and stands ready to provide resources and continued training as you and your office seek to comply with the law. Sincerely, Deidre Henderson, Lieutenant Governor. And so that kind of is an overview of the report. Obviously, there's a lot more. You can take the time to read that report. But I think the good news out of all of this is we did not find evidence of fraud occurring within the elections in Cache County. And I think the really encourageable news is all of these things are curable. There's nothing here that we found that's not curable. So with that, that's kind of my presentation, our team's presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions and then go from there.
What other questions? Go ahead, Nolan.
On finding 5.1 on page 8, I just think this ought to be a standard instruction for all of the state, not just Cache County, when it talks about the instructions placed on the ballot explaining how a voter can remedy a mistake on their ballot may cause confusion. I would think that's standard for anybody who's doing a voting by mail. Am I wrong there? So that, has this been wrong for a long time or what? I'm just trying to understand that deeper, and so that that instruction is good for our constituents in the county.
Yeah, and that's something that I think obviously David can answer in a lot more detail, but what we found is instructions kind of evolve over time, and you kind of start to feel where sometimes voters get confused. You see how they mark ballots incorrectly, verbiage, those kind of things. So that's something that can evolve over time, but just having clear and concise. And one of the biggest recommendations I have there is less is more. The less you tell voters, actually, the better it is. Sometimes you throw this big paragraph and they're not going to read it. But if you give them an example and say, fill out the ballot exactly like this with a simple oval, that can be enough that they get it correct.
Well, I just wondered if there wouldn't be instructions that goes throughout all of the counties on that, so it's maintained the same, so we're all looking at how you cross out a vote or whatever else, so that the instructions are straight for this county, the same, everything else is what I'm kind of looking at.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Good suggestion, yeah. Having standardized across every county.
Yeah, so that if this guy changes his vote in Box Elder County and this guy changes his vote in Cache County, we apply the same principles as to how that vote is counted.
Yeah, and as far as that goes, so this is kind of the instructions on the ballot sheet. One of the things you'll find in there, it refers to a term called adjudication, and we actually have an adjudication manual that the state has created to create that uniformity. So if somebody, sometimes you'll see people put X's in ovals, sometimes they'll cross it out and say, not this one. It gives a standardized approach to how those ballots are counted. Is that more in line with what you're thinking?
Yes, that helps.
Yeah, and that book, when we visited with Cache County, they had it in the facility, but it wasn't at the station where they do the adjudication. And so that's one of the recommendations that we have, is that that book is there and that people are trained on that they read through that book. And it gives classic examples. I mean, when you look at 5 ballots, you start to see exactly the kinds of patterns people do. So that is available to them and the rest of the state.
Go ahead, Catherine. Yeah. You bet.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your staff for coming and helping us in our elections. I know we were kept in the loop of what was happening over there, and we really appreciate you coming to help us. If we in, I don't know whether another word, like a probationary state right now, like are we going to have a lot more oversight to make sure as we come in this next election cycle that we're going to have everything done, dot our I's and cross our T's? Is this the question that I have for you? I don't know.
Yeah, so kind of what we'll do is Mr. Benson will have the opportunity to kind of evaluate those. So like I said, we statutorily cannot do the job of a clerk. And there's great value in having an independently elected clerk who is accountable to the people of Cache County. That's really important. So yes, there will be a lot more oversight. We do have liaisons from our office who are assigned to counties. So at least once a quarter they come and do visits. The person who came up on election night and stayed overnight, they weren't planning on staying overnight, but they ended up staying overnight. Roseanne Mitchell, she'll be here. She used to be the director in Salt Lake and Utah counties, a wealth of election experience. So we will provide that support and that help. And then definitely, the recommendations that come back from Mr. Benson, will evaluate those, make sure that they meet the mark, and then we will throughout the year ensure that those are being complied with and followed.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, Barbara.
You mentioned VISTA in your findings and training materials and training supplies and different things like that. Do they apply for those from the Lieutenant Governor's office, or how is that process?
Yeah, so there's various different ways that we have a plethora. The handbook is made available to the clerks. We have a resource that they can log into, share ideas. If they have questions, they can share that with other clerks. We also have a drive that just has video recordings of different trainings that we've provided, those kind of things. So, I mean, they're there. We also come around quarterly and provide trainings. I know we did some on chain of custody. I personally did that one, as well as curing ballots. So we do come around quarterly, provide those. So it's there, and I think the clerks know how to access that.
The supplies that, for example, we needed to separate the ballots properly. Those supplies come from the VISTA area, or is that a separate issue, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we do have some federal money. So there is an ongoing allocation from the state that clerks can use for voting equipment, some of those kind of things. We do have some federal money that's available. Some of it is the responsibility of the county to help provide that. Obviously, as the council, you know all too well the budget requests that are made. We have provided opportunities to purchase different types of totes, storage things, sills, stuff like that, because we felt the need over the last year and a half or so to really emphasize ballot storage, retention, those kind of things. So there is some money available. There usually is a matching component, maybe 80% we can use some of those federal funds, 20% the county, because there does have to be a little bit of buy-in. We did help fund the ballot center out at the airport. That is something we did use some of that federal money to do. So yes, there are some resources funding available.
Okay, and is that applied through with a grant request, or because it is federal funds, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the federal government allocates that to us. We make the request to the federal government. And then the county, we have a form that they can apply for that through. They can kind of request in advance, like with the ballot center. And they said, here's what we're trying to do. Here's the amount. We kind of review that and say, okay, here's what we can do to help you. But I think the clerk's office knows how to apply for those.
Thank you, thanks. And again, I'd like to echo Catherine's thank you to everyone being here. We appreciate you. Thank you.
The questions?
I don't have a question, but I have after I heard Nolan talk about the instructions and you're saying less is more, I had a brilliant idea.
Okay.
What if you put a QR code, said if you spoil if you have a problem, go to this QR code, put a website underneath it for those who don't know how to use a QR code, and have the state either do a video or very clear pictures and instructions that works for everybody. And then all you'd have to put is that QR code. It's just a thought.
Yeah, and I think I would like that in the ballot instructions. Anytime you put barcodes and things on ballots, some people get nervous with that, but it could easily go with the instructions, so that's a really good suggestion. It is a good idea. It is a really good idea.
Okay, that's all. And thank you again.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Well, we appreciate your coming up and taking your time and sharing this info with us and the process, the correction and everything, and helping us and be willing to help us. You've probably always been there, and so we'll, I think it's warranted that we lean on you heavily in this process. So, okay. If you'd like to, we'll finish with you. If we would like, Mr. Benson, would you like to, did you want to respond, take any time, or, yeah. Is that okay, council?
Yep.
That we go ahead and if you'd like to respond to something, that'd be fine.
I have a hand out, if that's all right.
It'll be fine. But I don't want you to leak any secrets that you're going to let us know by the 20th that you have to respond to them. You'll be fine. Sorry to surprise you like that, but I think that'd be good.
Looks like he was
David.
prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Council. My name is David Benson. I'm the Cache County Clerk and Auditor. I'm pleased to have a couple members of our election staff with us here, Michelle Stanger and Robert Edwards. Thank you two for attending. Michelle is getting out some examples of some of the work that we've done recently, and I'll address that in a moment. But to start, I'd like to read a letter that I prepared for Lieutenant Governor. Actually, I'd like to thank my friends from the Lieutenant Governor's office for coming. I know it's not always easy to get up here, so I appreciate that. Dear Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson, on February 6, 2024, I was presented with a draft of a review of 2023 Cache County elections created by your election staff. Yesterday, I received the final version of it. I have reviewed the report and hereby provide a written response for each recommendation in advance of the February 20th, 2024 deadline. Given the serious nature of the recommendations, I am encouraged that your office found no evidence that the November 2023 general election results were improperly certified. I'm also grateful that, with help from your staff and other members of our county, both the Hiram and Logan City December 2023 runoff elections were also successfully canvassed. I credit the dedication and determination of the clerk auditor staff in administrating these elections in the midst of great difficulty. I genuinely appreciate the significant effort represented by this review and assure you of my unwavering commitment to addressing these issues in a speedy, thorough, and conscientious manner. Since taking office this past June 30th of 2023, I have strived to balance the increasing duties within my two offices. I must emphatically note that I make a concerted effort, typically on a daily basis, to learn and follow county and state law in order to be in full compliance. Never are rules nor code purposely disregarded, nor are infractions intentional. I routinely encourage my staff to take the same approach to their responsibilities. In keeping with our office practice of making immediate corrections and improvements, I humbly report that 27 of the 31 recommendations in this review have been addressed, and that action plans to resolve the remaining 4 are scheduled to be complete by February 29th, 2024. While I have personally reviewed every single recommendation and action plan, recognition must be given to current office staff who purposefully and thoughtfully have worked from early December of last year to correct and improve our elections operations. Despite the disquiet associated with this review, I am heartened by the goodwill and cooperation shared between my staff and yours. Remembering that only examined processes can be improved, I sincerely invite your staff to return for subsequent reviews of the March, June, and November 2024 elections in Cache County so that my office may benefit from their valuable input. Most respectfully, David Benson, Cache County Clerk and Auditor. On this table, thanks from my coworkers here, we have a sample of some of the responses that we have to these recommendations. These binders represent our commitment to diligently and speedily respond to these deficiencies and correct them. And again, once more, we're grateful for the help that we received from our friends down at the state to point these problems out to us so that we can fix them. And these binders represent not just forms or templates that we use for chain of custody and other purposes, but also a lot of effort, a lot of forethought, a lot of purposeful thinking to determine what the best practices will be and how we can apply the guidelines and the rules that Lieutenant Governor Office presents to us to our county. And so I would invite you at your leisure, when you have a time, to come in and browse through some of those and to take a look at some of the fine effort that the election staff has performed recently. If anyone has questions, I'd be happy to respond.
Thank you for laying all this out for us, David.
Sure.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you're jumping on it, you're getting through it. I encourage that open communication with the Lieutenant Governor's office and work through these. There might be some tweaks and changes, but be open to them and we'll get it perfected. So, well, is there such thing as a perfect election? There's not. So. Well, hey, maybe we'll have our first one then.
To their credit, I think they are truly striving for that, though,
Yeah,
and we appreciate that help.
So, any questions? So, open anyone?
Well, I'll stick my hand up in the air and say, what 4 are remaining?
They're at the very.
They're in yellow.
The 4 that are remaining are in orange.
There they are, gotcha. No.
3.5 with a time frame of completion next week. 3.10 with a time frame for the end of the month. 4.3, again, time frame for next week. And 6.1, the end of the month.
Okay. As I read the report, I found it interesting that they talked about staff doing too many things at a time as we're doing that. So do we have the staff, and is our staff prepared for watching and doing those things in the next election so that we're not, that a staff can do one thing only until that is done, or where are we at on there?
Actually, if you look at recommendation 3.13, this is one that we've completed. It addresses a staffing plan that talks about both full-time and part-time positions, seasonal workers, and volunteers. And while it has taken us a little bit to get to this position, I feel that as of today, we are properly staffed and prepared for certainly the March election. We have outstanding job requisitions for seasonal workers, and we expect to be hiring them soon. No, I apologize, I take that back. We're asking for approval for additional seasonal workers this evening at the council meeting.
Okay, I will say, Michelle, thank you for what you did during the election, Annette. I watched you. You were awesome, and your staff. And I will say thanks to the Lieutenant Governor's Office and those people who were there. They were very courteous and helpful to us and helped us in that area. So from us as a council, thank you so much for that. We hope to make Cache County shine and make sure that our elections are in the right and proper manner.
Thank you. Yes.
I was really, in the report findings, I was concerned about the training, proper training, and I see you've answered that in 3.13 as far as training goes. How are you going to keep track of who's been trained on what and how that's going? Do you have a plan for that, David?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Barbara. Just today, we are doing some training on voter signature verification. And the plan is that for the training, we obviously have some documents that we must certify where people sign for the training, and we submit those to the LGO. There are other trainings. We're creating a comprehensive elections manual in our office that's specific to Cache County. And in that training manual, we'll make use of much of the materials that are provided to us. And I must say, most of those are at no charge as well. So they're very accessible. We can do it in small and large group trainings. It's very good material. But with this comprehensive training manual, we will have a sign-in sheet so that those who have been trained on certain areas will sign off on that.
Good. And so I'm assuming that you are going to, in budget opening, ask for additional employees. Is that correct?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we're requesting a few.
And so in that case, how will those people be trained and in what time frame? Because March is coming up fast.
Yes. Fortunately, these seasonal workers will not be required for the March election. We have sufficient staff for that. It's a relatively small election.
Okay.
But these will help us in both June and November.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thanks, David.
Other comments, questions?
Comment to echo what's been expressed about the gratitude that we feel as a council and those of us that were members of the council able to help out with the our little help. It was not much that we did, but we were present to ensure that we had what was needed for staff and for the Lieutenant Governor's office on the day of the recount, et cetera. Just very grateful for the efforts that have gone in to ensure that we produced successful elections for 2023. And also a deep expression of gratitude to our two city recorders who were very helpful in facilitating the process and stood by us as we worked through it. Thank you.
I'll just comment too. Part of the challenge we've had in the county as a whole is the turnover. And so hopefully we can have some stability going forward and people remaining in place who are trained and who can train others and watch over these things. So thank you for taking this on and
Sure.
following it through.
Thank you.
You know, it's interesting. You know, and I'm probably the first one that runs to a dessert called humble pie. And sometimes I eat it with a toothpick, and sometimes someone else feeds me with a shovel. And either way, it is probably the best pie that we'll ever taste and eat if we, as we all, pitch in together, understand our roles, and be happy to ask others to help us in those roles. I think that helps all of us. So I think we're hopefully, I know we're on a trajectory to do some good things here. Let's just keep it going. So again, appreciate the help. Other comments? Okay, appreciate that.
Thank you.
That was it for our workshop today, right? So we'll be back at 5 o'clock. Stay tuned if you dare, and finish up our regular county council meeting. Everyone's invited.